It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Other credit cards often charge annual fees for access to perks you might not even use, or they can come with restrictions. Apple Card gives you valuable benefits without annual fees. In fact, there's not a single fee at all. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Variable APRs for Apple Card range from 15.24% to 26.24% based on creditworthiness. Rates as of January 1st, 2023. It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Other credit cards often charge annual fees for access to perks you might not even use, or they can come with restrictions. Apple Card gives you valuable benefits without annual fees. In fact, there's not a single fee at all. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Variable APRs for Apple Card range from 15.24% to 26.24% based on creditworthiness. Rates as of January 1st, 2023. The following podcast contains explicit language, including the words, well, you'll just have to wait and see. Hi, I'm Josh Levin, Slate's national editor, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of February 13th, 2023. On this week's show, we'll talk about the Chiefs' win over the Eagles in Super Bowl 57 and the flag near the end that helped them clinch the victory. We'll also discuss Kevin Durant's move from the Nets to the Suns, ending the brief and not very glorious reign of the NBA's latest super team. And finally, the Athletics' Chantel Jennings will join us for a conversation about South Carolina and Dawn Staley's actually quite glorious reign in women's college basketball, marked by recent wins over UConn and LSU. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm the author of The Queen and the host of the podcast 1 Year. Stefan Fatsis, he is also in D.C. and is the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. Hello, Stefan.
Hey, Josh. Welcome back. How was Chelsea Fulham? Tell us.
Tim Ream, American hero, saved it off the line. I was in the home stand, though, and got like this long instruction sheet. This game was at Chelsea, informing me that I was not allowed to wear the visiting team colors, and that if I cheered for the away team, Fulham, in this case, that I could be ejected from the stadium. So I definitely did not cheer when the Tim Ream cleared it off the line for Fulham. Although I think I was in the American tourist section because there were a lot of American accents in London in general, but also at the game. But it was very fun. Thank you for asking. With us from California, Joel Anderson. He is the host of Slow Burn's Season 3 and Season 6. Hello, Joel. Before we recorded, I was saying that it was kind of like a college sports atmosphere that I think you would really enjoy. I'll see you at a Premier League game soon.
Yeah, man, I want to do it. You know, and actually some people did write to me and try to make, you know, some sales pitches about some teams to root for. I think Tottenham came up the most. I think I about like a handful, and I was like, I'll investigate. You know, that's how, I'm not going to make any promises.
You're going to do your own research?
I'm going to do my own research, but I do like the idea of going and catching a game in person. Like, that's always been my dream, to catch a soccer game, whether in Brazil or Europe or, you know, Mexico, something like that.
San Jose.
Whatever. That seems a little less appealing, but yeah, San Jose has good Mexican food, man. That's maybe I could, you know, do a twofer or something. I don't know.
And Joel, you're going to be absent from the show for a little while after this for work reasons that will be announced soon. But let's just enjoy the special times that we have together today.
Yeah, man. I mean, you just got back, and I'm on my way out. I'm sure a lot of people will miss me. Some might not, but I'll miss you all. This is the most fun. This is the most fun part of my job, believe it or not. So
you'll be here, but you won't be here. Is what
I'll be here. Maybe you all will let me drop in from time to time. We'll see.
I'd love that.
We'll talk about it.
In our Slate Plus segment today, we're going to continue our Super Bowl conversation, go a little bit deeper on the quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. To hear that segment, you need to be a Slate Plus member. You get bonus segments on this and other Slate shows. You get ad-free shows, and you get to support us. And who would not want to do such a thing? Slate.com/hangupplus. That's slate.com/hangupplus.
Rihanna was indomitable. The field was terrible. And for the first 58 minutes, the Super Bowl was incredible. Philly quarterback Jalen Hurts steered the Eagles to a 24-14 halftime lead. After his sprained ankle was twisted by a large man, Kansas City quarterback Patrick Mahomes limped into the locker room, where I picture a NASCAR pit crew of team doctors injecting him with a gallon of Toradol. Whatever they did, it worked. Mahomes engineered 3 straight second-half scoring drives to put the Chiefs up 35-27. Hurts responded with a 75-yard drive capped by his 3rd touchdown plus a 2-point conversion, 35-35. And then with 5 minutes to go, Mahomes took Kansas City 60 yards to the Philly 15. On 3rd and 8 with 1:54 left, he overthrew Juju Smith-Schuster in the end zone, setting up a go-ahead field goal and the possibility of a dramatic Eagles drive to win or force overtime. But the refs flagged Eagles defensive back James Bradbury for holding Smith-Schuster. Kansas City ran down the clock. Harrison Butker kicked a game-winning 27-yard chip shot with 8 seconds to go. Super Bowl 57 final score, 38-35. Josh, in the moment, this felt like an awful end to a riveting game. After the confetti cannons and Terry Bradshaw telling Andy Reid to waddle over for an interview during the trophy presentation. Does it still feel that way, or was it a great Super Bowl that included everything you'd expect from an NFL game, including lengthy debates over what constitutes a catch and a marginal call at a crucial moment?
Well, it definitely feels like an awful end, but I think Alex Kirshner, our colleague, did a really good job of explaining that it can be an awful ending and not be anyone's fault. The thing that was so kind of reverse of how things usually go in these situations is that at the end of a game, the refs will typically, or are typically encouraged to by some parties, to swallow the whistle and not call things that were called earlier in the game because of the idea that they should, quote, let them play and let the guys on the field, including the guys who are holding other guys, decide the outcome of the game. But in this case, defensive holding wasn't called the entire game. In some cases, on plays that were much more egregious than this last one, but it was called at the end. So that was a fun reversal of usual officiating complaints. But the thing that was the most fundamental problem here, which I didn't see anybody talking about, Joel, is that, yes, it was a hold. James Bradbury admitted it was a hold. Yes, sometimes they call holds and sometimes they don't call holds. But the problem was, football is the only sport I can think of, or at least the only popular sport that we watch here in North America, where a game can be tied with like 2 minutes to go or whatever, and one team can basically have an insurmountable advantage in a tie game. There was still like a minute 50 or something to go, and the game was still tied after this penalty, and the game was effectively over. And I can't think of a rule change that would necessarily fix that. I don't think that there's anything that can be done about that. But it's just so weird. The game just becomes so perverse at that point. Like you have, the spectacle of the Chiefs guy running free to the 1 yard line and like not wanting to score. I mean, the Eagles have pioneered pushing Jalen Hurts into the end zone. I was honestly kind of surprised that they didn't try to grab him and throw him and throw Jerick McKinnon. And so I'm serious. Like,
they should have run up behind him and pushed him forward. Yeah.
I think I was wondering why they didn't do that, or if they should have done that. But the fact that our heads go there, Joel, is like an indication of how ridiculous the scenario is, that a penalty with like 2 minutes on the clock in a tie game could effectively turn an amazing game into an awful and disappointing one.
Yeah, I'm just surprised you all think it was an awful and disappointing ending. I mean, I just thought this is football. And it's not like that field goal wasn't, I mean, that was a close game-winning field goal at the end. Like, I didn't get the impression that was going to necessarily, I mean, it theoretically is a chip shot, but it wasn't necessarily for that kicker. And so I didn't think that anything was necessarily, foregone conclusion at that point. And I guess, overall, I really hate when talk about a great game devolves into a debate over officiating.
Oh, I hate it too.
Because those conversations give life to the lie that a game is determined on one play. And it just so happens that play almost always happens to be the last one, or the close to last ones. Because we're not talking about the Dallas Goedert catch against his helmet with 2 minutes left in the third quarter. That didn't seem like a legal completion to me under the standards of the NFL. Like, I didn't feel like he had control of the ball before he went out of bounds. The scoop and score in the third quarter that seemed like that was a touchdown. Like the receiver made a move and the ball was knocked out of his hands and they returned it for a touchdown, but they said, oh, he didn't make enough of a football move. Okay. Well, I mean, that call could have gone either way. And then if either of those calls go against the Eagles, who knows if the game is even close at that point? So it's for the call itself. Bradbury bumps Smith-Schuster inside of 5 yards, which cornerbacks are allowed to do. Then Bradbury grabs him again as Juju is coming out of his break and turning upfield. And so there's only so much contact that's allowed, and it's happening right near the line of scrimmage and in front of the officials. So, okay, people are arguing that it's not a penalty. They're not arguing that it's not a penalty. They're arguing that it should have been called then. So when should defensive holding be called, if ever? Like never on a pivotal third down? Never in the red zone? Not in the fourth quarter of a tight game? Like if we're going to have holding as a penalty, in the guy, we all know he held him. We're just saying, that's kind of a ticky-tack call. But he fucking held him on the most important play of the game. What are the refs supposed to do? If the refs don't call it, then the Chiefs fans would be sitting up there saying, oh, that guy got held. He was coming out of his break. And that's not fair.
For a guy who doesn't like to talk about officiating, you're sure talking a lot about the officiating, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But, you guys made me. Anyway, Stefan, I know you maybe you feel different. I know that this is, we really haven't given you enough empathy here, I think. Now you know what it's like.
Stefan's not an Eagles fan.
He's an Eagles fan. I just went to school in Philadelphia. I have a soft spot for the Eagles and Philadelphia fans, but I grew up a Giants fan, Joel.
Okay, that's right. Okay. I can't keep up with like your Philly and New York. But anyway, go ahead. That's fine. But yeah. I think, are you disagreeing with me here or not?
I don't disagree with you. I think the only issue here is that I think in the moment everyone wanted to say and think, I can't believe they called that. It's terrible. The Zebras are deciding the game. Because that's the emotion you want to have. You wanted to see a completely dramatic ending where the Eagles would have a chance and Jalen Hurts would get the ball one more time and do something amazing. And we were denied that. So we were angry about being denied that. I think on reflection, especially after the game when Bradbury himself, the Eagles DB, said, it was a holding. I tugged his jersey. I was hoping they would let it slide. At that point, you can't be mad at the refs. Maybe you can be mad at James Bradbury because the one thing that the Eagles couldn't let the Chiefs have was a free first down. Because if they gave them the free first down, the game was going to end the way it ended, with the Chiefs controlling the clock, running it down to the end, and kicking what really was, Joel. I mean, there was very little chance that Harrison Butker was going to miss a 27-yard field goal, even though he doinked a 42-yard attempt at the beginning of the game.
Look. I'm not saying it was bad. I'm saying it was disappointing.
It was disappointing. I agree. That's what I'm saying. Like, we were all
really?
just disappointed.
What was so disappointing? I don't know if the game ended on a field goal with a few seconds left in the game. I don't understand.
Yeah,
what did you all want? It was a 3-point victory.
The most exciting minutes of the game, the last 2 minutes when it was tied, just like dwindle off the clock with the Chiefs kneeling on the ground. I mean,
so you had an entertaining game, and you needed every minute, every second of it to be in doubt until the very end. Like that's exactly.
I would rather the last.
I would not to be disappointed.
I would rather the last 2 minutes be exciting than the first 2 minutes. Again, I get back to the perversion of this sport that you love. It would have been better, so much better for the Eagles if James Bradbury had, instead of playing defense on that play, just like sat on the ground and just let the guy score a touchdown. Or if he had, I'm trying to think of other things he could have done. Run into the stands and give Roger Goodell a high five. I don't know. Just like anything else but attempt to play defense would have been better for the Eagles.
Yeah, fine. Maybe he should have just let him go and say, let go and let God. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it's the incompletion. I don't know. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So maybe it's on the Eagles defensive coordinator for not telling every one of the players to stop playing.
No, you can't. You obviously can't stop playing on that play. I'm being facetious, but I should go into a little bit more detail about what Alex said, Kirshner, in his piece, which is that the issue here is that football is perhaps the only sport, I'm quoting from him, where penalizable activity happens on a huge percentage, maybe even a majority of plays. And so it's not that you look at a replay of this play and you're like, obviously that's a penalty. You look at a replay of like every other play and you're like, obviously that's a penalty. And so it leaves everyone from, I guess the difference is that it wasn't just one fan base that was annoyed. It was like neutral fans who were annoyed. And I stand up for the neutral fan, Joel. I defend the neutral fan.
I guess, yeah, you know what? I would have liked for it to have not ended in that way if only some people wouldn't complain about it. If only some people couldn't complain about it. I was like, all right.
Oh, that's why. You didn't want to enjoy like excitement, Joel.
You didn't want to be
so
bothered.
that everyone else wouldn't be upset.
I left that game feeling totally good. I left that game feeling totally good about how the football season ended. I'm like, you know what? Competitive game, down to the wire, last second kick. I mean, I didn't need a Jalen Hurts last minute drive for that game to have redeemed itself. I'm sorry.
Last second 27-yard kick versus last second 62-yard kick. There's a difference.
And a lot of people aren't in on the joke that, because the thing is like earlier in the week or in the previous week, like Arian Foster did this bit. I think it was one of the Barstool guys, which I don't watch, but I saw the clip online about how the NFL is scripted. And a lot of people didn't understand that was a joke, that these games, that Arian Foster was just playing along with the joke. And so I just think all this sort of stuff plays into the idea that there are some nefarious forces determining the outcomes of games and anything other than like the players
This was the best
themselves.
evidence for the NFL not being scripted that I've seen in ages. The NFL wouldn't want the game to end with that bullshit.
Bullshit. It was holding. It was holding. The guy held him.
Disappointing.
Why is that bullshit? That's a defensive play. He made a bad play. Juju Smith-Schuster got away from him, and he held him, and the penalty was called as it was.
Bullshit has many definitions, and I think the one that Josh was alluding to is that it was just a bunch of people taking knees and sliding to the ground.
Thank you, Merriam-Webster.
Yes.
Not a big deal. Not a big deal. Go ahead.
I think the thing I'm realizing, Joel, and I mean this completely seriously, is that you love football so much that your bar for a good game is lower than the fan who's tuning in for the Super Bowl. Like, you demand a certain amount from a game that this game vastly exceeded. It was an amazing game, objectively amazing game. Jalen Hurts had one of the best games in Super Bowl history for a quarterback. The Eagles were brilliant in the first half. They kept Mahomes off the field. Like, Mahomes was kind of dominant, but had less than 100 yards because he could never get on the field.
The Chiefs didn't even have the ball for 9 minutes in the first half.
Amazing.
They didn't even have the ball for 9 minutes, which is unreal.
That's partly because of a defensive touchdown by the Chiefs that gave the Eagles the ball for like 16 straight minutes. Yeah.
The Eagles are super fun to watch. I actually love the Eagles quarterback sneak. It's like one of the great plays of our lifetime. The fact that they've just
Joel
basically
think that should be outlawed.
If we're talking about bullshit, they've got to figure that play out. Like, I get that the Eagles have figured out something on the lines that, like, they've got that offensive line, they've got a quarterback that squats over 600 pounds, and they just figured out that they can just mash the shit out of you on that. But that
do you think scouting departments are like really looking into high school powerlifting at this point? Like, that's the next big Moneyball advantage in sports.
The vengeance of Dan Kendra. I don't know how many people remember Dan Kendra, but he was reputed for. You remember that? Yeah, he was reputed for I think didn't he pop his eye vessels doing a leg press, something like 2,000 pounds. Anyway,
What's your Dan Kendra blood vessel popping? Joel. Sorry, Afterball reference. But yeah, and then you got to see in the second half, and maybe we can talk about this more in the bonus segment. Patrick Mahomes do the things that get people like us talking about whether he is the greatest quarterback in the history of quarterbacking. Nobody is. He is? Okay. All right. Well, I guess don't join Slate Plus then. Joel's killing our revenue. Stefan, I mean, what stood out to you?
Well, let's start with the fact that he was probably shot up with a gallon of Toradol and had a high ankle sprain and was clearly in pain, not just after he had his ankle grabbed when he was tackled in the first half.
Stefan, before you go on, Mahomes said that he didn't get a shot, by the way, at halftime, which, I mean, whatever. But go ahead.
Yeah. Then they used a yard of tape on his ankle, whatever. He got something to dull the pain because, I mean, we heard a lot of just will to win and there was nothing going to stop me, but NFL players rely on more than grit to get through these games, as they should, because these games are brutal.
This is a controversial opinion, but don't you think Mahomes' injury actually made the game better?
Yeah.
It injected a little more drama into it.
Did you say inject?
I did. Not intentionally, but I wish I had.
I mean, those scrambles with his ankle, made the game better might not be accurate. Burnish his legacy is the most inarguable thing about that game. And seeing him try to overcome that was extremely dramatic. Yeah. And, does it speak well of him that he did that? I mean, in a strict, playing on field sense, yes. Is it the kind of thing we want to be encouraging our children to do? Probably not. But it's like the rare kind of football injury that seems morally neutral to try to play through in a game like this. And he was amazing.
He was amazing. I mean, and his numbers were terrible, but he was amazing because of the things that they weren't great. I mean, he didn't throw for 200 yards. This was not they scored 38 points. He didn't throw for 200 yards.
They didn't have the ball. That's because they barely had the ball
and still managed to score 38 points. And that's what I'm saying. It's that it was all the other characteristics that make people say after 5 years in the league that he's the greatest quarterback of all time. It's the creativity and the vision and the innovation, right? I mean, his ability to improvise is unparalleled. That you mentioned the scrambles. The main scramble was the 26-yard run on that last drive after he had re-injured the ankle. That was the best football play of the game for Patrick Mahomes. The pocket was collapsing against him, against a really good defensive line. He's not the fastest guy in the world to begin with, right? And he found a way to get upfield and keep that drive going and put them in position for the end of that game. I mean, he was amazing. And combine that with, and we should probably credit Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid for finding flaws in Philadelphia's defense and exploiting them. The 2 touchdown passes that Mahomes threw to Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore, the same play, different sides of the field. They were all because they noticed a weakness, and Mahomes and his coaches found a way to use it.
They really made Philly look stupid on this place.
And Philly, I mean, its defense led the NFL in sacks this season. We're talking about a supposedly historically great defense that had 4 players with double-digit sacks. And as Orlando Brown, Pat Mahomes' left tackle, said, put it on a fucking T-shirt, 0 sacks. So it wasn't just that Mahomes did it by himself. I mean, that offensive line really held up their end of the bargain against the defense. And before, I don't want to, because we have a bonus segment and we can talk a little bit about Patrick Mahomes here. The one thing I would like to say about this, the other side of this, is Jalen Hurts, because he was fantastic. And again, I said this in a previous episode. I was there when he suffered one of the biggest embarrassments that any football player can ever have. He's 19 years old, gets pulled midway through a national championship game. He's the reason his team is playing bad. His backup comes in and supersedes him and then beats him for the starting job the next spring, and Jalen stays on there. So from that,
yeah, it's not just that he got benched. It's that the benching was vindicated, and it was proved that he was the reason they were losing the game.
Yeah, right. I just thought that Jalen Hurts might pop up at another FBS school or something and do pretty well. But for him to have been here is just amazing. And I'd hope that Jalen's performance in some ways makes GMs and other NFL front office types stay up at night thinking of all the squandered Black quarterback talent from the previous decades. And that's whether the QBs were asked to change positions or were buried on the depth chart or not chosen at all, like somebody like Charlie Ward, who won the Heisman Trophy. And he didn't get drafted in part because he said, don't draft me if you're not going to draft me in the first round. So I just think of Jalen Hurts' emergence and the way that he thrived in the spotlight last night. Man, it just made me really proud. And I'm glad that, that he seems like he's going to have just this great future in the NFL. And, his team did not win last night, but he didn't lose either.
Coming up next, we'll talk about Kevin Durant and the fate of the super team in the NBA.
When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? If you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows more than 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/hangup to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/hangup. Indeed.com/hangup. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Less than 24 hours after the Brooklyn Nets sent Kyrie Irving to Dallas, Kevin Durant and his business partner reportedly requested a meeting last Monday with the Nets front office. There wasn't much mystery about what they wanted. A trade, just like the one they asked for last summer. But this time Durant had a specific destination in mind, the Phoenix Suns. And now everyone in Brooklyn, from Durant to Nets owner Joe Tsai, realized it was time to finally part ways and admit their super friends era was over. In the hours before the close of the NBA's trade deadline Thursday, the Nets sent Durant to Phoenix for 3 pretty decent role players, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, and Jay Crowder, and 4 unprotected first-round draft picks. The move makes the Phoenix Suns one of the favorites in a wide-open Western Conference and turned the Nets from possibly the greatest basketball team of all time, according to the New York Times a year and a half ago, to a cautionary tale about the excesses of player empowerment and front office mismanagement. Stefan, before we talk about the Suns, I just want to know, how are you going to remember the KD and Kyrie era Nets?
Oh, Joel, I'm going to gaze upon the triptych of my framed KD, Kyrie, and James Harden replica jerseys on the wall of my basement rec room and wonder what could have been. No, I think this era in New Jersey, New York, Brooklyn Nets history will be seen as the apex of, as you mentioned, NBA player empowerment. 3 megastars dictating roster creation, trades, and the hiring and firing of coaches. Billionaire ownership desperate for attention and instant success. And management forced to acquiesce to players and ownership and convince itself that it's all going to work out. Maybe these 3 dudes were just a colossally bad personality fit and not enough people saw it or were willing to say it because they were so good individually. Or maybe Insta teams don't really work that well. You could argue that the only time this has worked to its desired conclusion, and maybe I'm wrong here, was a decade ago with the Banana Boat Miami Heat. Every NBA champion since then arguably has not been a lab-manufactured super team. The Spurs in 2014, no. The Warriors in 15, 17, 18 were a core of drafted stars. KD was the one and possibly unnecessary competitively add-on. The 2016 Cavs were LeBron and Kyrie and a bunch of guys, but it wasn't Kyrie. The 2019 Raptors were fluky. The 2020 Lakers were LeBron, Anthony Davis, and a bunch of guys. The 2021 Bucks were Giannis and a bunch of very good guys. And last year's Warriors were the drafted stars again with pieces, minus KD. There are a lot more super team implosions than successes.
The Warriors teams pre-KD are the only one on that list that actually had a group of homegrown stars and won a championship before a major acquisition of a major star. Whether you want to label that a super team or not, you're kind of eliding the fact that the Raptors traded for Kawhi, the Lakers traded for AD, the Bucks traded for Drew Holiday, and so on and so forth. You need an accumulation of stars to win an NBA championship, and the fact that the Warriors were able to get them all in the draft is historically anomalous. There's also, I would much rather talk about the Durant of this than the Kyrie of it, especially because you guys had a good conversation about Kyrie last week. But it just needs to be said that without the pandemic, this all could have worked or might have worked, or without, KD's latest injury. They had won like 20 of their last 22 games. I mean, this was not a mistake from a talent perspective. And in general in sports, Joel, betting on talent is probably the bet that you should make all of the time, maybe just most of the time. And this is the example that makes it most, if not all. And Kyrie is just, a guy that nobody should be in business with. Like, he is the issue here. It's not the concept of having good players all play together.
No, but it's the concept of which good players, right, Joel?
No, I think that's right. I mean, the Nets had to do it, right? Like, I mean, I think that you can't really make an argument against them saying we've got to take these guys if they're available. The problem
and I should
is that
say
Kyrie
that Zach Lowe in his most recent podcast said that he believes that the Nets never wanted Kyrie and that they had to have him to get Kevin Durant.
Right.
He was like the DeAndre Jordan, to think of Kyrie Irving as like a guy that you don't want, who you have to take to get Kevin Durant, and free agency is like kind of absurd, but like, that you
But isn't that
you
part
do
of
what you
the
have
point
to
I
do.
was making, Josh, that like you hand over your front office decision-making to one of the players and you get stuck with something that you don't want or probably need or is going to doom you?
That's probably true. But I mean, the thing is that although you probably would not have wanted to give one of those max slots to Kyrie, you had no choice because you got to do whatever you can to get Kevin Durant. And the thing is that Kyrie was like uneven and a little erratic prior to going to Brooklyn, but like this other shit really just took off once he was there. Like, I don't think for as eclectic as he'd been prior to showing up in Brooklyn, there was nothing indicating that he would thrust himself into the middle of a argument about anti-Semitism or like, I mean, none of us could have predicted COVID, right? I mean, just on his face. And then the other piece of that is that
his departure from Cleveland was normal. It's just like, guy wants to have his own team. That's like the oldest trick in the book. His departure from the Celtics was way less normal and like kind of a red flag, but like, what are you
I don't know. There was the flat earth stuff. There were some red flags there. He's a weird dude. And
he is, but I think you think that like his talent outweighed any of those concerns prior to his stint in Brooklyn. And then once that happened, then it's like, well, man, you kind of get whatever you get. Like, you deserve whatever happens as a result of that.
We don't want to talk about the officiating, and then we talk about the officiating. We don't want to talk about Kyrie, then we talk about Kyrie.
So we don't have Kyrie, you don't have Kevin Durant, you don't have James Harden. How is it that you lose all those guys, and all you've got is Ben Simmons? Like, I mean, what an incredible failure. I mean, it's not, I mean, you can put blame everywhere, but like the Nets front office traded Kevin Durant, who, if he's healthy, has a claim as the best player in the league. Maybe he's not better than Giannis anymore, but he has a claim. And you got back Mikal Bridges and picks. Like, that just seems like an incredible failure on the part of the Nets that I don't think they'll recover from anytime soon. Like, I feel like they're going to be down for quite a while, and they're going to have to watch Kevin Durant. But I guess the issue with me is, you guys tell me, I don't know why people believe that the Suns are such a prohibitive favorite. Well, they're not a prohibitive favorite, but they're one of the top contenders to win the championship. And I'm like, you got Chris Paul, who's always injured, and I say that as a Rockets fan who knows better. Kevin Durant's injured right now. Devin Booker gets hurt all the time. DeAndre Ayton doesn't want to be there. What makes people think that it's going to be any different in Phoenix right now?
Well, I think that the Suns, if they fail, will fail for like normal, boring reasons of player health that you just outlined. And I think the Nets are actually not in particularly bad shape. They're betting on the downside of the Phoenix Suns, which is incredibly high. They own all of the Suns' first-round picks for forever. And it's funny that they got Mikal Bridges, who is like the literal opposite of Kyrie Irving, as the guy who is the most reliable player in the NBA and was apparently extremely sad that he might have to miss a game because he hasn't missed a game since high school after he got traded, but then was very happy when he learned that it won't count as a missed game because he had not yet reported to the Nets. The Nets are like stocked with, wing players, which is what everybody in the league wants. It was weird that they reportedly were offered between either 3 or 4 first-round picks for Bridges after they acquired him. So they have players that teams want in addition to having a lot of draft picks. There are teams in the NBA that are in a much worse position than the Nets are. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the Suns are super fascinating for precisely the reasons you laid out. And Durant, if healthy, And if paired with Devin Booker, is going to be a pretty indomitable offensive force. And they're going to have to go through the Nuggets and the Grizzlies and probably the Warriors when they get back healthy. It's going to be a really interesting.
And the Mavericks?
The Kings?
And note that I didn't list the Pelicans, who have their own extraordinarily frustrating injury issues. But, Stefan, Suns have a new owner, Matt Ishbia, who's a billionaire, willing to pay the luxury tax, excited to do this trade on his second day in the office. Let's let it fly. But it's, they're pursuing, I guess, the super team route here. And are you suggesting that maybe they shouldn't have done that? Are you, what do you think of, the Suns kind of going on all in with the, there's only one championship to win, with the likelihood that it's going to fail and they're going to have major problems on the back end here?
Because this is what owners do. And look, you have the opportunity to trade for Kevin Durant. You trade for fucking Kevin Durant.
What if they could have gotten him, but it would have had to take Kyrie Irving? You don't do that, apparently, according to you.
You probably don't, based on what we've seen over the last year and a half, right? 2 years. It would not make sense. What makes sense from the Suns, it seems to me, is that nobody in the West is loaded. Nobody is a prohibitive favorite right now. And if the Phoenix Suns with Chris Paul at age 7, 8, and KD at age 33, 34, and not super healthy, are going to have a chance to make a run for an NBA championship, it's going to be right now. So if you are going to be a new owner and excited to have the keys to the office and are willing to go tens of millions of dollars into luxury tax territory, sure, why not? This is what NBA teams do. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm saying that the likelihood that it won't work is probably greater than the likelihood that it will, sometimes for just plain old boring basketball reasons, health reasons, like you said, Josh, but also maybe for, the sort of compatibility reasons that just doom these kinds of partnerships more often than not.
That's the thing that's underappreciated, is that everything you do is unlikely to work because it's unlikely to win a championship. Everybody wants to win one.
Right. And the Suns really didn't have a choice. What were they going to do? They're just going to, their championship window as presently constructed was pretty much over. Paul's 37. He can't be your second or third best player anymore at this point. And if you're going to take a swing, you might as well take a swing with a guy like Kevin Durant and see if you could get something out of it. And hey, if it doesn't work out, you still have him for a couple more years, maybe you can put some pieces around him and Devin Booker and try to make it work. My thing is, though, is one championship actually really worth it? And I don't know, because the Phoenix Suns have not won a championship. I think
probably
they
worth
won
it
one
if
in
you
the
haven't
70s.
won one. No.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, did they win one in the 70s or they lost to the Celtics? That's right, in the 70s. So they've never won a championship in franchise history. But my thing is you say that the Lakers won a championship and it doesn't seem like their fans are really happy. You know what I mean? Or the Raptors now. They won their championship.
Well, the marginal value of a championship for Lakers fans is definitely lower than the marginal value of a championship for Suns fans.
Fair point. I just feel like for people, there used to be a window of time where you'd be like, I'm not going to complain. My team won a championship. And I feel like that window has grown so much shorter in recent years that people get frustrated immediately with the fan. Like the Warriors fans, they've had this great run, but they were still very frustrated when they were doing poorly a couple years ago. So I don't know. We'll see. But I hope the championship is everything going for this championship is everything they think it's going to be, because it just seems like fans get dissatisfied so much more easily, so much quicker now than they used to.
The last thing that I will say is that I think we talked about the Redeem Team documentary, which was okay. I would not, rush to Netflix to watch it, but it was pretty good if you're into basketball. The much more interesting Dream Team documentary that will probably never be made is how the Dream Team concept and the Dream Teams in practice were the incubator for the super team era. How all these guys playing together redeemed, to use the parlance that they use, the national team program, won a bunch of gold medals. But it also, I think in a very real way, changed the NBA. It incubated the Miami Heat configuration of LeBron, Bosh, and Wade. They came up with that idea of playing national teams together. And apparently it incubated the Durant-Booker friendship and desire to play with each other. Was it worth it for America, Joel, to win all these gold medals and to destroy the NBA with the creation of the Super Team era?
Well, David Aldridge had a piece in The Athletic where he points out that what's changed, and this is a direct result of the Dream Team era, is that he writes the NBA has developed into a group of nomads. We're used to this now. This is just the way of the league. The propensity of players to use their power and their agency to move around is just what it is. And that's fine. And I think and it's great, and they should have that agency. It is accepted that your career is going to be more transient. It is normal. It is what basketball players grow up with, even in high school, on AAU teams, and now in college with the transfer portal, and it is good for sports. But what happens when these pairings, as the Brooklyn one show, is that when it fails, it looks really bad. And it looks like teams are so desperate they'll do whatever the players want, and the pairings may not be valuable. Like, they may not work. And you're right, they don't always work because only one team wins the championship every year. But when it's as dramatic as what happened in Brooklyn, and we're leaving Harden out of this equation too. I mean, the guy bolted because he didn't like Kyrie Irving. It's just magnified.
Smart guy. See, like, he has a lot of sense.
Good judge of character. I should credit Ramona Shelburne and Brian Windhorst. Their ESPN piece noted what they described as the national team being fertile ground for super team incubation.
In the next segment, we talk about the big game from this weekend. I'm talking about LSU, South Carolina. What are you talking about?
Time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Other credit cards often charge annual fees for access to perks you might not even use, or they can come with restrictions. Apple Card gives you valuable benefits without annual fees. In fact, there's not a single fee at all. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Variable APRs for Apple Card range from 15.24% to 26.24% based on creditworthiness. Rates as of January 1st, 2023. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy. You could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $700 on average. And auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the more than 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $698 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. South Carolina women's basketball coach Dawn Staley, the pride of North Philly, stood on the sidelines of her team's game against LSU on Sunday in a throwback Randall Cunningham Eagles jersey. Given that, I'm thinking she wasn't totally satisfied with this weekend's major sporting events, but it must be some consolation that her undefeated Gamecocks blew out the no longer undefeated Tigers 88-64 in front of a sellout crowd in Columbia. This after South Carolina beat UConn 81-77 in Connecticut the previous Sunday. Joining us now to discuss is our friend and frequent guest, Chantel Jennings of The Athletic. Hey, Chantel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So South Carolina is the defending national champion, and they have looked like it this season, and especially on Sunday. They jumped out to an 18-2 lead. The game did get a bit tighter in the second and third quarters, but it was never really a contest. And you can actually make a reasonable argument that 4 different players were Carolina's MVP on Sunday. The bigs Aaliyah Boston and Camila Cardoso, and guards Bria Beal and Zaya Cook. That is pretty scary for the rest of the country now.
Yeah. There aren't very many women's basketball teams nationally that are bringing a 6'7" player off the bench or an Olympian off the bench, and South Carolina does both. So they're pretty stacked.
And it's obviously no surprise that they're having success this year after bringing back most of their players from the national champions. But what is different about this year's team, and kind of what have we seen of them, maybe more in the game where they were challenged a little bit against UConn, to suggest that there's a different team, a better team? How has our opinion of them changed or evolved this year?
I think everyone has upped their games just a little bit, which makes a difference when you are as good as South Carolina. Any sort of extra padding you can give is a good thing. Aaliyah Boston is sort of getting some hate from fans because they see her stats have gone down a bit and they think, oh, this must mean that she's worse. But what they're not seeing is that when she is collecting those 13 points, 10 rebounds a game, she's doing it with 3 defenders on her versus 1 or 2, which means that the players around her are getting better looks, more open shots. And then I think, one big difference to me is Camila Cardoso this season. She was a transfer in from Syracuse. She was kind of taking, she seems a little timid at times, and I think you could still make that argument for her on the court. But she is having these moments in these bigger games against UConn, against LSU, where she's just looking more dominant. And I think when you have a high-low post game with Aaliyah Boston and Camila Cardoso, they're really, the only team I can think of nationally that matches up with that would be Stanford, which has Lauren Betts, who's 6'7", and Cam Brink in the post. There just aren't teams that can defend that high-low game. Zaya Cook is playing better. And then you kind of get these wrinkles where Raven Johnson, who's a redshirt freshman point guard, and Kira Fletcher, who's a 5th or 6th year transfer into South Carolina, their guard play is really complementary and gives South Carolina different looks. And so I think Dawn just has so many weapons. It's ridiculous to watch.
So, Chantel, obviously, South Carolina jumps out to an early lead, like 18-2. LSU fights its way back, to its credit, and the game was fairly, tight, within a couple of baskets, couple possessions, and then somewhere around midway through the third quarter, South Carolina just seemed to overwhelm them and put it away. And I couldn't help but notice, because to your point about Aaliyah Boston, Angel Reese, 5 of 15, 4 rebounds. It just kind of seemed like LSU got gassed, that maybe they trying to shoot over and get and find open space at the basket over Aaliyah Boston was just a little too much for them in the moment, right?
Yeah, and that's, again, where South Carolina's depth comes into play. You can literally run an Olympian as your third player off the bench. Your legs are constantly going to be fresh, and you're going against a team at LSU that basically has 3 scoring weapons, Angel Reese being the main one. And so if you can shut her down, it's not like they have these players 4, 5, 6, 7 that are going to go off for 20 points, whereas South Carolina does. And Dawn Staley had actually said, Alexis Morris, their point guard, was having a really good game for them early on. She is arguably what kept it close. Not even arguably, she is what kept the game close for LSU. And Dawn Staley said at halftime, we're going to just try to wear her out and hope that by the end of the third quarter, her legs are a little more tired. So Dawn was really smart to make a shift. She moved Kira Fletcher into some full court pressure on her just to make every possession a little harder, make her work a little bit harder so that it sort of added up over time. And by the third and fourth quarter, Alexis wasn't quite as efficient as she had been in the first and the second quarters.
LSU, Chantel, was supposed to be rebuilding. Kim Mulkey came there, a couple of years ago now from Baylor, multiple national championships there, not without criticism for her personality and the way she has managed her athletes. It seems to be a love fest. Players are very supportive of her publicly right now at LSU, and she has taken advantage of the transfer portal to sort of create a new team. How good are they, though? One of the criticisms I've read is that their non-conference schedule has been incredibly soft, and maybe the 23-0 was a little bit of an overrating of how good they are and the kind of challenges that they're going to face as we get closer to the tournament.
I mean, it's not a criticism. It's just a fact. They had a soft schedule. They had played like 2 ranked teams coming into this game. I did not think this was going to be a close game. I had predicted this was going to be a 20-point game. And I had talked with a lot of other sports writers who were like, what? Are you kidding me? And I was like, when LSU proves it, then I'll believe it. The proof is in the pudding. And LSU had 2 close games that they almost lost. One to Georgia, one to, I think, Texas A&M right before this game. Like, this was not a team. I think when you see teams that are, playing soft schedules and blowing everyone out by 30, then you say, okay, this is a team that gets its shit together and gets its business done. That's what South Carolina would do most of the time. But LSU hadn't done that. And you look at their team, and specifically with South Carolina, I think if you're going to beat South Carolina, you're not going to be able to go bucket for bucket with them in the paint. You're going to need to hit some 3-pointers. And LSU is not a team that is schematically set up to hit a lot of 3-pointers. They hit, I think, less than 6 a game. And so, if you're not sort of going 3 for 2, which a team like I think UConn could do, they didn't necessarily in the game that was close against South Carolina. But, this was not necessarily a great matchup for LSU, I think, person to person. I didn't think that Angel Reese, who was putting up great stats, and everyone was saying, oh, if LSU wins, she should be the National Player of the Year. My thought was, prove it when you're playing against someone who has been the National Player of the Year, and then I'll take it a little more seriously.
Harsh, tough, but fair.
I was going to say, Josh. I was like, yeah. How does that feel to hear that about your school?
I'm crying. I'm crying right now. It made me feel really sad. Is what it made me feel. Dawn Staley and Kim Mulkey have not had the warmest relationship. After the game, Dawn Staley is very complimentary of Kim Mulkey and LSU, saying they're ahead of schedule and pointing out, as I would point out, that they have the #1 recruiting class coming in next year. And we will be speaking the name Michaela Williams very much over the next 3 to 4 years, who is an amazing, amazing talent who's going to be maybe pairing up with Angel Reese next year at LSU. But I think it is fair to contrast Dawn Staley and Kim Mulkey. I mean, the most obvious contrast is the way that they have publicly and not publicly supported Brittany Griner. Dawn Staley being one of the most outspoken advocates for Griner, keeping her name top of mind every day while she was incarcerated in Russia. While Kim Mulkey said maybe twice ever that she was like hoping that Brittany Griner would come home. I
believe she was praying. Yeah,
she was praying.
She did a lot of praying.
It's well documented, including in Brittany Griner's memoir, the dissolution of their relationship. Griner played for Mulkey at Baylor and has said that Mulkey tried to encourage her to keep her sexual orientation under wraps. And so Mulkey's gotten deserved criticism for that and for her lack of public support for Griner in comparison to a lot of people. And yet, Stefan alluded to it, Chantel. I find it so fascinating that players like Angel Reese, like Flau'jae Johnson for LSU, just incredibly charismatic and smart and interesting players and young women, have been so vocal in their support of Kim Mulkey, not just saying, I like her, but saying she's made me a better person and has encouraged me to be myself. What have you made of all of this? I mean, Kim Mulkey's obviously a fascinating character.
Yeah, it's definitely confusing at times. And I don't know how much of it is sort of the separation between women's college basketball and the WNBA, and how much, it just sort of feels like, oh, this is a different world. It's not my backyard, because in her backyard, like, you watch Kim Mulkey on the sidelines, like, she rides for these players. If someone is going to get on Angel Reese or Flau'jae Johnson or Alexis Morris, like, Kim Mulkey will rip off a ref's head to defend her players on the court, right? And I think as a basketball player, that is probably something that is seen as, she's got my back, right? Like, she'll literally, like, march to half court and try to fight a ref for me. And I think, Johnson is a player who is also a rapper and is a signed rapper. And she has said, Kim really supports me in this. I was recruited a lot of places, but Kim believes in me as a basketball player and rapper. And so I think there's this element of these players sort of what they see in their reality, how they feel supported, how they felt welcomed. Angel Reese through the transfer portal saying, she didn't necessarily feel like she could be 100% herself at Maryland, but now she can. Flau'jae Johnson, same thing with LSU. And then sort of seeing this world that might feel further away from them, even though it shouldn't, where, I don't know how much they understand about the disillusion of this relationship between a player like Brittany, who helped make Baylor what it was and helped make Kim what she is as a coach, to who she is now. And, I think there just sort of feels like this weird break there. I can't explain it.
We were talking about, Dawn and Kim not having the warmest relationship. Well, there's also Dawn's relationship with Gino Auriemma, especially after last Sunday's game when, in a rematch of the 2022 title game that South Carolina won, they won the rematch, 81-77 at Connecticut. And I just want to know what you think about that, Chantel. Does that mean anything in terms of the hierarchy of women's college basketball, or are we still just sort of waiting on the tournament and for UConn to get its full complement of players? Because it's worth noting that, UConn is missing Paige Beckers, AZ Fudd is out, and I think Caroline Ducharme, she's out as well right now too. So they're missing like 3 really important players. But did that win by South Carolina mean anything to you in terms of like where college women's basketball is, who the dominant program is now?
Yeah, I think Carolina's been the dominant program. You look at that, the season that didn't have the tournament because of COVID, South Carolina would have won that. If I was, betting because I was on a sports writer, I would have put money on them. They won the national championship last year. They're 4-0 against UConn in their last 4 meetings. But as you said, UConn has had insane health issues this year. Like, their all bench team would be probably like a group of Final Four starters for most schools with a half decent coach, right? Between Paige and AZ and Caroline and Dorka, who's missed some time. And, they have 2 players total who've appeared in every game for UConn this season. This is definitely, when you have a coach like Gino who just sort of picks up All-Americans like it's nothing, you don't necessarily ever feel bad for someone like that. But this is a year where you say, wow, he's actually done a good coaching job sort of shuffling in all of these rotations. But what stands out to me about that game is that they did it in Hartford, Connecticut. And I think there were also some really interesting dynamics in terms of personnel in that game that stood out to me. Dawn Staley went with Raven Johnson at point guard, a redshirt freshman, first-year point guard. She put Kiera Fletcher on the bench. Kiera played like 4 minutes, who's this 6th-year player, transferred in from Georgia Tech as sort of the veteran leader. And afterwards, it came out that Kiera basically said, like, Raven, you've got this. Like, Dawn put her trust in a freshman in Hartford, Connecticut, in front of tens of thousands of fans for UConn. Like, there were probably 5 people cheering for South Carolina in that building. So I think that's the difference for me. And I sort of also look at the LSU South Carolina game this way. I don't know if it would be necessarily a 20-point difference in that game if there weren't 18,000 South Carolina fans screaming and making it hard for communication for LSU on that end. I think a neutral court might play a little bit more into the favor of LSU. Similarly,
LSU lost them by 6 at home last year with a worse team. So home court is a big deal.
Home court's a big deal. And I think just when you have, especially with transfer portals, you have people playing together for the first time, communication, it's not early in the season, but communication is still really important. And a coach is talking to players who are playing for her for the first time. That matters. That 20-foot difference where you can't yell to your player to say, this is what we're doing, that matters. And so I think all of that sort of compiles together. But no, South Carolina is the best, coolest, most interesting team in the country right now by far.
Well, they're the coolest, Stefan. I don't know what anybody can do with that. So what do you think of the tiff between Gino and Dawn after that game where Gino said that one of his players, Lou Lopez Seneschal, had bruises all over her body after the game, and Dawn Staley took a lot of offense to that?
Yeah, a few things. Gino complaining about refs is nothing new. Like, death, taxes, and Gino complaining about refs. Like, you can bet anything on it. In my mind, I think he was playing a bit of a long game. He was being pretty strategic here, knowing that there's a chance that they meet up again in March, and he wants to put that out into the NCAA officiating world, this is what I think, this is what I feel, watch out for, tough defense. And I think, Dawn Staley kind of saw that and was like, no, you're not going to do this. Like, what the heck? And I think Dawn Staley, when we talk about, Kim Mulkey's a good example earlier, when we talk about coaches who ride for their players, players who play for Dawn love her on and off the court. I have not talked to players who don't enjoy Dawn's playing for her. I mean, obviously practices, I think there's a difference between being hard on players and she has high expectations, but Dawn is going to back up her players. She's going to defend her players. And I think she didn't like the way specifically that came out because their defense is really good and it is really aggressive. And if you can't handle it, you can't handle it. To me, you play up to what the refs will allow. Starting in 5th grade in basketball, they tell you control what you can control. Don't complain about it. You can't control the refs. And the refs decided in that game they were going to let it be physical. So rather than complaining about it, why don't you just be physical, rather than not and saying that there's all these bruises on Lou's body, which might be true.
Do you think Dawn Staley was cool with the holding call on James Bradbury?
Yeah, I was going to say that. People, thanks, Chantel. I'm so glad that people are, God, stop whining about calls. Just play the game,
Well, we can keep it to basketball, but I think in terms of Dawn and her thoughts on the officiating, I think Dawn's team specifically, it's interesting, actually. I was laughing after Gino said that because I did a story on Bri Beal, who I think is the best perimeter defender in the country. Mm-hmm. She's incredible. And
can I interrupt just to say they had this stat on ESPN that the players she's guarding score 3.6 points a game with 21% shooting. It's the most incredible statistic I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I think basically the defensive player of the year is between her and Aaliyah, and I would not, argue with anyone who goes with Bri. I might go with Bri, but it was interesting talking to Dawn. I was asking her, why is Bri such a good player? Is it her hands? Is she quicker than everyone? Does she have X-ray vision? She can see something. And she said, Bri is so smart. She plays up to exactly what the refs will allow and what the rules will allow. And in that way, she said, literally, she's a cheat code like Diana Taurasi is a cheat code. Diana Taurasi in the WNBA knows exactly what the refs will allow her to do, and she does up to that. And I thought it was interesting because then Gino's sitting here saying, they're being so physical, they're doing all of this. And Dawn is telling me that Bri, and I would argue her whole defense in a way that does play up to what the refs will allow them to do, is basically doing what Gino's favorite, best, most interesting player from UConn does in the WNBA. They're playing up to what the refs will allow, which that's good coaching. That's good, smart basketball. Do what the refs will allow you to do. And if they start calling it, stop, which I think South Carolina does a pretty good job of. You don't see Bri fouling out of many games. If they're going to start calling the way she body checks a little bit, which technically is that, violating the law of, or the principle of verticality, whatever the rule is in the reffing rule book. Yeah, but the refs don't really call it. She doesn't hand check.
Chantel Jennings writes about basketball for The Athletic. Thanks, as always, Chantel.
If the refs call it, stop doing it. That's what I took from that segment.
Yeah.
It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Other credit cards often charge annual fees for access to perks you might not even use, or they can come with restrictions. Apple Card gives you valuable benefits without annual fees. In fact, there's not a single fee at all. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Variable APRs for Apple Card range from 15.24% to 26.24% based on creditworthiness. Rates as of January 1st, 2023. And now it's time for Afterball, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. Joel, what do you remember about Dan Kendra? We've got to, follow through on the promise we made earlier in the show.
I mean, he was, I think, the best quarterback in his class, 96. He was going to be amazing. I heard, West Pennsylvania legend. And then he got to college and moved into fullback. Eastern Pennsylvania.
We can't
sorry.
let that pass.
Glad you corrected the record. And he got moved to fullback in college. That's what I remember about Dan Kendra.
His Wikipedia page is like too short. I think somebody needs to go in. I'm going to assign this just to the world. Somebody needs to go in and fill this out. I'm going to read it in its entirety. Dan Kendra III, born March 15th. Salute, March 15th, is a former American football player, a highly touted Parade All-American 1995 National Offensive Player of the Year, high school player from the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference. Kendra picked Florida State over Penn State after 2 years behind Thad Busby. I have never heard of this person.
I heard Thad Busby. I remember him. Oh, yeah.
Kendra was scheduled to take over as the Seminoles starting quarterback in 1998 before tearing the PCL in his right knee during spring practice, thus elevating Marcus Outson to the number 2 quarterback spot for the entirety of the 1998 NCAA football season and Wikipedia entry. Come on, Joel.
That's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what happened to him after 1998, huh? That's 2000, I guess. He went undrafted, and that's all we know, right?
Here's a 2013 story from SB Nation, The Legend of Dan Kendra.
Right, joined the Navy as a reservist. He's now living in Pennsylvania, and it appears he, at least at this point, was selling medical devices.
Are you on LexisNexis or something? Or what are you?
No, this is an SB Nation long form story.
Okay.
And he did have ruptured blood vessels in his eyes. That is true.
That's right. He was trying to leg press 2,000 pounds. I'm pretty certain that's how he did that, if I'm not mistaken.
The machine was theoretically past its limit, but Van Hallinger managed to pile on more weight. This is it, Kendra, he said, pointing. That's 1,335 pounds.
Okay.
We can't fit any more weight on. This is our last shot. This is like in Star Trek. I don't really watch Star Trek, but it's like this. We can't go. The ship won't hold. Kendra nodded. Okay, coach. He positioned himself under the weight, took a deep breath, and with the weight sagging on the machine, powered up a single mighty rep. The room erupted in screams and cheers. Van Hallinger helped Kendra up. The kid had ruptured blood vessels in his eyes, and they were already devil red. His face, too, was red and getting redder by the second. His breathing was uneven. Coach Van, he said, I feel dizzy. And then he gets rushed to the training room. Other than his red eyes, he seemed fine. Coach, he said, that was the best rep I ever had in my whole life. That needs to be on the Wikipedia page. Mark Weingartner, The Legend of Dan Kendra, SB Nation Longform, 2013. Joel, what are your Dan Kendra's ruptured blood vessels in his eyes? I'll come up with a more pithier way to put it in the show notes.
Okay, we'll figure it out. Well, look, perhaps you, dear and faithful listeners, are familiar with the latest book banning controversy unfolding in Florida, a state I once lived in for 4 years. If you aren't familiar, here's the long and short of it. School officials in at least 2 counties, Manatee and Duval, ordered teachers last month to remove or wrap up their classroom libraries. The removals came in response to new guidance by the Florida Department of Education, which follows a ruling from the State Board of Education that a law restricting the books a district may possess applies to both school libraries and teachers' classrooms. A teacher who violates that law could face up to 5 years in prison. A Florida Department of Education spokesperson told the Washington Post that teachers found guilty could also risk penalties to their teacher certificate. The book ban has meant school libraries across the state have been unable to order new books. And in the public school libraries of Duval County, where Jacksonville is located, for instance, that means even Roberto Clemente, pride of the Pittsburgh Pirates, was one among more than 1 million titles removed from bookshelves. This sort of attack on public education is a fact of life under Governor Ron DeSantis, who has ramped up his offensive against classrooms and university campuses across the state. That includes limiting what schools and employers can teach about racism, banning the College Board's advanced placement courses in African American studies, and ending instruction about gender identity and sexual orientation, among several other totalitarian measures. All in all, a lot of bad shit is happening to the 3 million public school students in Florida, more than 60% of them members of racial minority groups. So let me tell you the reason I bring this up, because as you know, Hang Up and Listen is a sports show that sometimes ventures into the political square. I, Joel Anderson, think that high school and college athletes and their parents and coaches should consider a boycott of Florida's colleges and universities, with the obvious exceptions of Florida A&M, Bethune-Cookman, Florida Memorial, and Edward Waters, all of them HBCUs. If the athletes of other racial groups want to join them, fantastic. If there are people who are members of other marginalized or vulnerable communities who believe that there are other political reasons to boycott Florida, great. If there are people who don't consider themselves members of those particular communities, but want to be allies, or even better, co-conspirators, amazing. Today, I'm making a direct request, though, to Black Floridians and other Black student athletes who are currently considering schools in Florida to reconsider. Now, look, I know hoping for sports-driven boycotts is largely a fool's errand. For more than a generation, there's been discussion of college basketball players staging a sit-in during the Final Four, and the games have continued to go on. In the fall of 2015, I was at the University of Missouri when the players threatened to sit out a game against BYU as part of a campus-wide protest against racist incidents on campus. The school president resigned, but the game went on as planned, a 20-16 win for Mizzou. In 2020, we even had on a couple of inspiring UCLA football players who were organizing athletes amid the darkest days of the pandemic. And man, they were so smart, so resolute, so impressive. And as we all know, they and their fellow players eventually fell into line and played an abbreviated season in spite of the risk. There are so many reasons why young athletes aren't likely to consider a work stoppage. And I understand that it's asking a lot of them to balance their ambitions as an athlete with the demands of activism. It's maybe not even fair to expect them to do the sort of work meant for politicians and lobbyists. But I can't think of anything that would speak most directly to the fundamental disrespect for the contributions of Black Americans currently unfolding in Florida under the DeSantis administration. And anyone who follows football knows that Florida is one of the nation's top producers of talent, ranked third among states and current NFL players. And we know that the vast majority of those players are Black. When I lived in Tampa, believe me when I tell you that I haven't lived anywhere that the players and coaches are so desperate to thrive at the game. And that includes living in Louisiana, Oklahoma, Georgia, California, and of course, Texas. The state's obsession with the game can't be found in palatial facilities or six-figure salaries for the high school coaches. No. It can be found in the intensity and desperation with which their Black players play the game. The expectation in Florida then, and pretty much everywhere else, is that Black people are going to dutifully suit up for the games, and the schools, administrators, coaches, and fans are going to reap the benefits. But I'd love to see what might happen if there was a disruption in that process. This year, Florida State, and Miami each signed recruiting classes ranked among the top 20. That's not bad, certainly better than the state deserves at the moment. But what if Black people in Florida used one of their most visible platforms, that of college football, to draw attention to DeSantis' overreach in public schools? What if enough athletes, a handful of the blue chippers, just decided to go to Georgia or Oklahoma or Tennessee and pin the blame on DeSantis and the Stop Woke Act? What if Mario Cristobal or Billy Napier had to explain to their fans that they couldn't reel in a better recruiting class because they're laboring against the national perception that the state is hostile to Black students? And we know that that perception matters, especially to college football coaches working in the southern United States. Let's go back to 2007 at the University of South Carolina, where head football coach Steve Spurrier spoke out against the Confederate flag flying atop the state capitol.
If anybody were ever to ask me, my opinion is we don't need the Confederate flag. It was embarrassing last year when Corso, Fowler, and Herbstreit were doing the game day, and some dude was waving that Confederate flag behind the TV screen. It's just embarrassing to me, to our team, our school, our state. That's my opinion.
Years later, in 2015, weeks after Dylan Roof fatally shot 9 members of a Black church in Charleston, South Carolina, then Governor Nikki Haley signed a bill calling for permanent removal of the Confederate battle flag from state capitol grounds. Spurrier said, "Obviously, all of us in college sports, we know the importance of equality, race relations, everyone getting along. I know the coaches all over South Carolina were happy and glad to see the flag come down." A year later at the University of Mississippi, the school announced that Dixie would no longer serve as the school's fight song, part of a decades-long campaign to distance itself from Confederate iconography. And in 2020, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, players and coaches all over Mississippi directly campaigned at the state capitol for legislators to remove a Confederate emblem from the state flag. Mississippi State running back Kylan Hill increased the pressure, tweeting that he was no longer willing to represent any Mississippi institutions on the field if the flag wasn't taken down. A number of his teammates supported him, as did his head coach, Mike Leach. In June of that year, the state legislature voted to remove the flag. One Democratic legislator suggested naming the flag change legislation after Hill. Scott said, "The voice of this young man was a tremendous voice." So this is my challenge to the Black football players, parents, and coaches of Florida. Who's going to let DeSantis and his supporters know that there will be some consequences for taking Black history, Roberto fucking Clemente, for example, out of the schools? Maybe it's not the same as voting him out of office or holding Republicans accountable for their embrace of the far right's worst instincts, but it's something. When it seems like much of nothing has made DeSantis' administration more restrained in their ongoing power grab. It would be so satisfying to see DeSantis and Florida's legislators who don't want books about Black people in the state's classrooms or as part of the curriculum say, well, maybe the Black students don't belong on your football fields either. I know what I'm asking for is unlikely, but I can't stop fantasizing about it. Being a sports fan, of course, is hoping against hope for a win for your team. There's a big game happening in Florida right now, and Black folks can't afford to lose it.
Joel, that was great. And there was, I think, an analogous thing happened after Roe v. Wade got overturned. There was a lot of speculation about how it would affect recruiting in women's sports. Chrissy Parham, who we had on the show, who had an abortion, talked about it publicly while she was in college at the University of Arizona in 1990. She said that if Roe v. Wade hadn't been the law of the land at the time she was in college, she would have had to seriously consider going to, a school where she knew that her reproductive rights were supported. I haven't seen, I don't know if either of you guys have seen much follow-up reporting in the year since about what the effect has been. But it's definitely something that has been on a lot of people's minds for a lot of reasons in this era now where college athletes do have more autonomy. And so I think will keep coming up as an issue.
Yeah, no, man. I mean, that's the other piece of it. I'd hope that, people would take up the mantle of activism then. There's still time. People can still do these things. These are still pressing political issues all over the country. And athletes and their parents, they can make decisions about where they want. I mean, these are also just practical decisions about where do you want to spend 4 or 5 years in school.
Yeah.
Well, just this past week, Alex Morgan, the great soccer player for the United States, said that transgender kids should be allowed to play youth sports. And she did single out Florida and Texas and legislative action to deny kids from playing. Morgan said, playing in Florida and Texas, that's something that the team definitely needs to look at. The inclusion of trans kids in sports is the inclusion of kids in sports. Everyone should have the ability to play sport. And she went on to talk about why the U.S. women's national soccer team players are going to continue to talk out about it. So it's there, and it's in other sports and in other issues too, Joel. And you're absolutely right. To have other people come out, and maybe it's pro athletes coming out, Joel. Maybe it's head coaches at colleges coming out. Maybe it's guys that played at Miami and Florida State speaking out. You're right. To see some sort of collective action would be terrific.
Deion Sanders, very vocal. I mean, there's a lot of guys that, kind of that they're beyond the reach of their administration. He's from Florida. Wouldn't hurt to say something about it. Just saying.
That is our show for today. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. To listen to past shows and subscribe or just reach out, go to slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. For Joel Anderson and Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levin. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.